There are songs that entertain, songs that trend for a season, and songs that quietly fade into memory. Then there are songs like Pata Pata, melodies that cross borders, survive generations, and carry something deeper than rhythm. When Miriam Makeba released Pata Pata internationally in 1967, few people realized that this cheerful dance track would become one of the first African pop songs to truly capture global attention, while also symbolizing resilience, culture, and the complicated story of an artist living far from home. At first listen, Pata Pata feels simple. It is bright, rhythmic, joyful. The beat invites movement almost instantly, and even listeners who don't understand the language find themselves smiling. But beneath that lively groove lies a layered history, one tied to apartheid South Africa, exile, cultural identity, and the power of music as a voice for people who often had none on the world stage. The phrase Pata Pata itself comes from a popular township dance in South Africa. Loosely translated as touch touch, it refers to a playful dance style where partners lightly tap or touch each other in rhythm. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, this dance became a social escape in segregated communities where daily life was heavily restricted. Music and dance provided brief freedom, moments where joy could exist despite political tension. Miriam Makeba first performed versions of the song years before its international release. In South African clubs, it was already known, already loved. But when she re-recorded it abroad, with refined production aimed at global audiences, something extraordinary happened. The song began traveling far beyond African borders. Radios in Europe picked it up. American audiences embraced it. Suddenly, a township dance tune from Southern Africa was echoing in cities thousands of miles away. This global rise did not happen in isolation. It was closely tied to Miriam Makeba's own journey, a journey marked by talent, courage, displacement, and an unwavering commitment to her roots. Born in Johannesburg in 1932, Makeba grew up surrounded by music, but also by the realities of apartheid. Opportunities for Black South Africans were limited, and artistic expression often existed under scrutiny. Still, her voice stood out early. It carried warmth, depth, and emotional clarity that resonated instantly with listeners. Her early career began with local groups and performances that blended jazz influences with traditional African sounds. Those performances gained attention, and before long, she appeared in an anti-apartheid documentary film that reached international audiences. That exposure changed everything. Invitations to perform abroad followed, offering possibilities but also unexpected consequences. When Makeba left South Africa for what she thought would be temporary travel, the political climate shifted dramatically. The South African government, unhappy with her growing international visibility and perceived political stance, revoked her passport. Suddenly, returning home became impossible. Exile was no longer a choice, it was reality. She would spend decades away from her homeland. In that context, Pata Pata takes on deeper meaning. While it sounds carefree, it was recorded by an artist carrying the emotional weight of displacement. The joy in the song contrasts with the pain of separation, yet perhaps that contrast is precisely what gives it strength. It allowed her to celebrate African culture even while physically distant from it. By the late 1960s, the global music industry was beginning to open slightly to international influences, but African artists still faced significant barriers. Western audiences often categorized African music narrowly or overlooked it entirely. Pata Pata challenged that pattern. It didn't present African music as exotic background sound. It presented it as mainstream, danceable, relatable pop. The song's success helped reshape perceptions. Listeners who had never previously engaged with African music suddenly found themselves curious. Who was this singer? What did the lyrics mean? What other music existed from that part of the world? Cultural doors began to open, slowly but noticeably. For Miriam Makeba personally, the success brought both opportunity and responsibility. She became not just an entertainer, but a cultural ambassador. Journalists increasingly asked about South Africa, about apartheid, about her experiences in exile. She did not shy away from those conversations. Instead, she used her platform deliberately, speaking at the United Nations, advocating for sanctions against apartheid, and consistently reminding global audiences of the struggles facing her people. That advocacy sometimes complicated her career. Political engagement can limit commercial opportunities, especially during tense geopolitical periods. Yet Makeba appeared willing to accept those trade-offs. Music, for her, was never only about chart success. It was about identity, dignity, and storytelling. Despite heavy themes surrounding her life, she maintained a musical style that emphasized warmth and accessibility. Even in serious songs, her voice carried hope. In upbeat tracks like Pata Pata, that optimism became infectious. Audiences didn't feel lectured, they felt invited. Another fascinating aspect of the song's rise is how it bridged generational gaps. Older listeners appreciated its jazz undertones and polished vocals, while younger audiences embraced the dance rhythm. Few songs manage that balance effectively. Pata Pata did so almost effortlessly. As years passed, the song's meaning continued evolving. During the height of apartheid resistance, it became a subtle symbol of African cultural pride. After apartheid ended, it shifted again, becoming a nostalgic reminder of resilience and artistic excellence. Today, it often represents timeless African pop heritage. Interestingly, some listeners assume the song was overtly political because of Makeba's activism. In reality, the lyrics themselves are largely about dance and social enjoyment. Yet context shapes interpretation. Knowing the artist's story, listeners often hear deeper undertones, even where none were originally intended. That dynamic demonstrates how art interacts with biography. Makeba eventually returned to South Africa in the early 1990s after apartheid began dismantling. The return was emotional. She had spent over 3 decades away. For many South Africans, she wasn't just a singer coming home. She was a symbol of endurance, returning to familiar soil. By then, Pata Pata had long cemented its place in global music history. It had appeared in films, commercials, compilations, and countless playlists celebrating world music. Young artists cited it as influence. DJs rediscovered it periodically, introducing it to new audiences. The endurance of the song speaks to something beyond trend cycles. Many hits fade because they rely heavily on contemporary production styles. Pata Pata relies more on rhythm, melody, and human voice, elements that age gracefully. Its simplicity becomes its longevity. There is also an authenticity listeners instinctively recognize. The song doesn't feel manufactured for global appeal, even though its international recording polished certain aspects. It feels rooted in real community experience. Critics sometimes debate whether global success diluted its original cultural context. Did international production smooth out certain traditional elements? Possibly. Yet, without that adaptation, the song might never have reached worldwide audiences. Cultural exchange often involves negotiation between preservation and accessibility. Makeba herself seemed comfortable navigating that balance. She consistently incorporated traditional African languages, instruments, and themes into her work, while still engaging global music markets. That dual approach influenced many later African artists pursuing international careers. Beyond commercial metrics, the emotional resonance of Pata Pata remains its strongest legacy. For Africans in diaspora communities, it can evoke home, memory, celebration. For non-African listeners, it often represents first exposure to African pop sounds. In interviews years after its release, Makeba sometimes expressed gentle amusement at how one song overshadowed much of her broader catalog. She had recorded deeply political pieces, complex jazz compositions, and traditional folk adaptations. Yet Pata Pata remained the global signature. Rather than resist that reality, she embraced it, recognizing its role in opening doors. Her later life included continued performances, activism, and mentorship of younger musicians. Even into older age, her stage presence retained warmth. Audiences described her concerts as both musical events and storytelling sessions, where songs blended with reflections on history, culture, and identity. When she passed away in 2008 after a performance in Italy, tributes came from across continents. Musicians, political leaders, and fans acknowledged not just a singer, but a cultural bridge builder. And inevitably, many of those tributes referenced Pata Pata, the song that introduced millions to her voice. Today, decades after its release, the song continues circulating in digital playlists, nostalgic radio shows, and documentary soundtracks. Each new generation seems to rediscover it, sometimes through parents' record collections, sometimes through films, sometimes through social media snippets. Its endurance suggests that certain musical qualities remain universally appealing regardless of era. Rhythm that invites movement, melody that feels welcoming, voice that conveys sincerity, cultural authenticity combined with universal accessibility. More importantly, the story behind the song reminds us that music rarely exists in isolation. It carries context, political climates, personal journeys, societal struggles, cultural celebrations. Understanding those layers transforms listening from passive entertainment into richer appreciation. For Miriam Makeba, Pata Pata became both blessing and responsibility. It gave her global recognition, but also placed her under constant public attention. She handled that visibility with notable grace, rarely separating her artistic identity from her cultural advocacy. And perhaps that is why the song still resonates, not merely because it sounds good, but because it represents something larger, the idea that joy can coexist with struggle, that cultural expression can cross borders, and that one voice, carried by melody, can influence how the world sees an entire continent. In the end, Pata Pata is more than a dance song. It is a historical artifact, a cultural ambassador, and a reminder that music often travels where politics cannot. It brought African rhythm into global mainstream spaces at a time when such crossover was rare. It turned a township dance into an international phenomenon, and it ensured that Miriam Makeba's voice, even during years of exile, was never confined by geography. Long after trends shift and charts change, that voice still echoes. And somewhere, whenever the opening rhythm begins, people still instinctively move, touching, smiling, dancing, continuing a story that started decades ago but shows no sign of ending. If you find today's video helpful and informative, please kindly hit on the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching.